Thank you, everyone. Apologize for the 10-minute delay. This meeting is being held in a hybrid fashion, with board members being present in the board meeting room as well as on the phone or Zoom. This is the Lehigh County Authority for the regular meeting of April 24th, 2023. Let's have a roll call of board members, please.
Sure thing. Brian Noggle.
Here.
Amir Camilli.
Here.
Ted Lyons.
Here.
Linda Rosenfeld. Here. Norma Cusick.
Here.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
John Miller.
Here.
Mark Branner. We have 8 board members present today.
Yeah, thank you. The materials in our board package were distributed to the board members in advance via hard copy, email, and also available online. We're going to review the agenda right now, and any need for any executive sessions?
Yes, thank you. We have no changes to today's agenda. Just want to note that there is a planned executive session following the close of the regular meeting to discuss legal matters with our solicitor.
All right, thank you. Any questions? All right, now move on to the approval of the minutes from the April 10th, 2023 board meeting.
I move that the minutes be approved.
I'll second that. This is Norma.
Made by Linda and seconded by any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
I,
Any opposed? Abstention? Signature? Okay. At this point in time, we open up the floor to anybody from the public who has any comments on non-agenda items. Anything that you want to discuss?
No, thanks, Brian.
No, thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Jenny and Brian. Anybody else? Okay, moving on then to action and discussion items. We have item under Finance and Administration. Title is Resolution Number 4, 2023-1. It's the destruction of authority documents seeking approval. It's a yellow document within the board package and digital board package pages 6 through 8.
All right, thank you. This is pretty straightforward item related to the annual destruction of documents in accordance with the Municipal Records Act. So in accordance with our policy and the Municipal Records Manual, we need to pass by resolution the destruction of certain documents which are listed in CWA. The majority of these are financial, accounting, or utility billing, customer service records that have met their retention deadline and be destroyed. If there's any questions on those?
I have a question, comment.
Yep.
Are there any documents that we keep in perpetuity?
Lots of documents we keep in perpetuity. Chris, you're kind of more the internal expert on this. That's, I mean, besides the engineering records, which we have tons of.
So the engineering records are the only ones we're obligated to keep forever. Everything else falls under some sort of schedule as determined by the municipal act that we follow. I think what we're in the process of doing is sorting through all of the paper that we've kept for the past X number of years and trying to weed that out and make them more digital format so they're easy to manage and maintain.
But the engineering records, for all the right reasons, stay.
Yes, sir.
Stay.
And generally speaking, it's until new revision has been done. So if we have as-built, we keep the as-built for whatever until we do a new main lay project, and then the as-built from 1910, the originals are shredded and we keep the new ones in its place.
How about insurance records?
So as long as the policy is active and there's any open claims against, they will be maintained.
I like to make a recommendation that we keep our insurance records forever. Because cases come up out of nowhere from the way back machine.
So there's, sorry.
Yeah, well, perhaps you're way ahead of me, but we want to keep track of who your insurance carriers were and what companies.
I would agree with you, and I would say we tend to, generally speaking, err on the side of keeping things rather than destroying them. What we've done so far, and this is our third year, I believe, of doing this. We've pretty much kept it very limited to the financial records that were already on the 7-year schedule or the 3-year schedule. That's kind of GFOA standard and Municipal Records Act. But lots of compliance records we keep forever and always. A lot of financial reporting we keep from the homes and the engineering personnel, you know, those kinds of things.
Okay. So we have before us resolution number 4/2023-1. The resolution authorizing disposition of certain records, and those records are detailed on Schedule A, for resolution number 4/2023-1.
Move to approve.
I'll second.
It's shocking because Amir has twice volunteered to second the motion and something else has jumped in. All right, so I'm going to give this one to Amir. So motion by Linda and second by Amir for resolution number 4/2023-1. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
You have to,
Aye.
you have to have a vote on this, yeas and nays. Are there any nays to this one? All right, so we'll count it as officially unanimous. Those present. All right, moving on then to, we don't have any items under water. We do have one under wastewater, two under wastewater. First one is KISS system modeling. Final alternatives analysis, FAA, seeking approval. This is blue documents within our board package and digital board package pages 9 through 24.
Great, thank you. And for this one, we've kind of been teeing this one up over the last couple of meetings, doing some presentations to give background to new board members and looking at the preliminary screening of alternatives that is basically at its completion point. So Phil has a presentation to lead into the next phase of our Act 537 work. And do you want me to start the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. You go, Phil.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're gonna be talking about the final alternatives analysis proposal. And we, of course, have an acronym for that, of FAA, as Brian mentioned. So let's get into it. The agenda. The first one is the admin items refresher. That's gonna sound repetitive, but I think it's important to reiterate again. Then we get into some of the proposal, some of the required projects at the conceptual level right now, and then the next steps. So again, to repeat some of the items from the last time I spoke to you, end of March. DEP has a very clear expectation for this 537. And they're gonna hold us accountable to the whatever schedule we come up with for implementation. And that first bucket, like I'm calling it, is the 26 to 2035 bucket. And then any projects that fall outside of that bucket that we do not include, there needs to be another Act 537 plan developed in about 10 years. So this is, I know this is a busy slide. You've seen this before, maybe 2 or 3 times, but Lisa and I, we want to pause here. And I'm gonna have Lisa drive the bus regarding how much detail you want to get into, but these 9 objectives is the problem definition we're trying to solve. And like I mentioned at the March board meeting, the first one requires more discussion about, specifically what are we putting in this first bucket of projects. So that's number 1 is going to be revisited with the signatories at the May KISS meeting. Then the rest, I don't think we need to change per se, but I'll at least jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I wanted to just pause on this slide because we've shown these 9 objectives a few times before. We haven't spent a lot of time on them. But as we get through the final alternatives analysis and start really honing in on what's going to go in the plan as our selected solution for the challenges, these objectives become really important, and we will need to spend more time talking about them and making sure we understand what is must have in the solution and what are things that are nice to have, or how do we weight or prioritize these goals of the whole program. So just as an example, we number 6 talks about minimizing the number of independent projects that are constructed inside the city. That's an important goal for the city, but is that as important as eliminating overflows? Where does it fall in the overall, how we look at the projects and how we prioritize what we want to achieve with the projects that will come out of the solution? So we don't want to spend a lot of time on this today because we think all 9 of these should be discussed and really understood, and a scoring matrix or something put together. So when we're looking at the final solutions, that we really understand how we're selecting what projects get done. But that's kind of a future conversation we're going to have, and maybe even an opportunity for some committee meetings or smaller discussions around what these really mean.
Just a quick question. On number 5, the vocabulary we have used, recognize long-term. It's not a tangible. You recognize that some of them needs pipe had to be repaired, but how do you measure that? You follow what I'm saying? Recognition, so some of the pipes and pumps has to be changed, but.
So when we say recognize in this context, we're saying we're going to build into the plan the projects that need to be done to address the long-term needs, and look at it in the time period that they need to be done.
Okay.
Do not neglect. Old infrastructure is the intent of number 5. And I don't want to put AJ on the spot, but I'm going to. The whole idea of the risk registry, helping us make a decision.
Yeah, so one idea I propose is developing a risk register to identify basically what the project risk would be associated with particular projects. So it could be anything from ability to work a plan, ability to get an easement, to construction risk associated with a particular type of work. It's deep construction, it's in karst topography. And the idea we would identify those risks, and then we'd also come up with mitigating strategies to help reduce the risk and use that as part of selecting the best alternative. So it's just one other, obviously cost, schedule, but risk is something I think we should be assessing as we determine which options are the best.
So is the assignment of priorities up to us or all the signatories?
It's really the whole region. And in some ways, even though LCA will pay for a lot of the work, and we will develop the plan and working with the city and the consultants to put the plan together. Ultimately, each municipality has the right to approve or not approve the plan. LCA will ask the board to do a resolution to approve the plan, but DEP is looking for municipal buy-in, not necessarily LCA buy-in. So everyone needs to be part of the conversation, but I think our board's perspectives are important to the whole process, and why I think we need to spend more time talking about these.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Hazel.
Yeah.
There's another slide you've seen already. Just easy reference point if you want to go backwards in time. This is number 15. If you can believe it, over the past 3.5 years. So in order to wrap your head around what this plan theoretically is going to look like, broken down into 5 components. And we'll start at the bottom and work our way upstream. So Klein's Island, we have to raise the peak wet weather capabilities. We've talked about it a handful of times, which I'll get into a little bit again. And of course, we have to implement the master plan. The source reduction plans are a big wild card at the moment. And you know, we've received the plans back from all the municipalities. And I guess we're grateful that they've given us the plans, but however, they're not quite optimized, yet. So, you know, some people may be doing more than they should, some people may be doing less than they should. We have to, as a region, come to a consensus if that's the acceptable approach, and of course, DEP has to weigh in. So there's more to follow on the SRPs, but as of now, we have to go with what has been provided. And I'll get into this a little bit more later. Conveyance, you know, it sounds simple. There's two main projects, but of course, there's a lot inside both of those. Little Lehigh, you know, from the water plant down to Klein's Island needs addressed. And of course, the Western Lehigh, as everyone knows, needs addressed. And again, there are connectors that come into the main trunk lines from the signatories that are showing as potentially problematic from a peak flow standpoint in the future. So we will have to talk to DEP about how to handle those specific interceptors. The common items, that's more of a modeling approach, which is in the appendix. And Amir, that gets to your point about long-term rehab, that's included in that common items. And the PTP, as of now, we're assuming that the implementation of the PT master plan will have no impact on what we're doing with this FAA. So that's the assumption we're making. So what I mean by that is we're going to treat it and then discharge it back to the interceptor as it does now. That's the assumption as of today. This should look familiar. This is our commitment page right from the interim 537. I'm not going to go over the seven in detail, but I do want to highlight, of course, the one we're talking about today is the one in red, the 26 to 50 planning period. And that's what we're going to be, that's what I'm asking for authorization for, the FAA. Again, you've seen this before. This is right from the model. It's called a blossom diagram. So it's the existing infrastructure, and then you add on the signatories' I&I plans. You add in the 2050 growth projections. You add in a 5-year storm. You add in I&I creep, but you reduce water conservation. So there's a lot of variables in play. And this is the output from the model in a 2050 case. So the bigger the dot, the more gallonage, the gallonage is overflow. That's what that represents. And the color has the same thing to do with the pink or the purple. That's the quote unquote worst of the colors. So, you know, back to our slide where Lisa and I stopped for a second. All the solutions to date are trying to eliminate all those dots on the screen. And that's where, you know, we have to talk about timing for projects. So that picture is important as to why we're doing this. That's a little bit of the background. So the proposal itself, just some lead up to the proposal here. As a refresher, flow meters were in the ground from March through October of 21. QAQC was performed, 4 different rounds were performed. That concluded December of 21. Took about 15 months to prepare and calibrate the model. That was done last June. We rolled right into the capacity problem definition. That's how that blossom diagram on the past slide was created during that phase of work. And then, of course, the PSOA was done this past 6 months in order to try to solve that blossom diagram. That's the phases of work to date. This is a busy slide, and all this is in the proposal itself. The introduction, I don't have to get into it. You've heard me introduce it. The objectives, you know, trying to size the infrastructure appropriately, using NOAA rainfall data. That's a 5-year event. And again, 2050 demands, which is another wild card. As I mentioned last month at the March meeting, the projections are front loaded. So it's across the board. Everyone wanted their projections. 80% of the projections are in this first bucket. That was their best guess. So, you know, it's a balancing act. What happens if the flows don't materialize? That's more at the plant at Klein's Island itself, but I'll get into more of that as we go. What's going to be done exactly is we're going to obviously use the model to solve and come up with a solution. Where exactly is the interceptor going to go? What else can we eliminate? Can we start eliminating pump stations? For example, can we get rid of Park Pump Station? Which I'll talk about shortly. Deliverables, the PowerPoints, tables, memos, cost estimates are a big one. The schedule, we're planning to go through December, but we want to accelerate the schedule, so we want to be done by Halloween. And that even if we're done by Halloween, that only gives us about 11 months before the famous September 2024 deadline. So I don't think we're gonna have a problem getting done this phase by Halloween. After Halloween is where it's gonna get the most trickiest, if you will. And then the budget. So again, there's the proposal is split up into 4 tasks. Task 1 is coming up with the specific definitions for the model runs. We did this for the PSOA. We actually did about 18 different model runs for the PSOA. For the FAA, we're going to create, the intent is to do about 6 model runs. We're going to have definitions for all 6. Site walks are included. You know, we're going to start asking PennDOT, other entities for infrastructure that's buried in the areas that we're talking about. So once we have task 1 done, once we have the specific model runs defined, get into the actual modeling. And right there's where I say the 6 model runs. That's where I say signatory 1 SRP. That means that is what the municipalities have provided to date. That's what that signatory 1 SRP stands for. And again, the biggest takeaway from task 2 is the timing. We're doing it into this bucket, or we're doing it in the next bucket. That's still not determined yet. What exactly is going to fall into that first bucket. And after we have that task 2 done, we're getting right into the estimates, which of course have been done already, but they're going to be refined once we start, you know, really narrowing down the solution. And, you know, task 4 is just the meetings and the workshops. So that's the thought process for the proposal. So the required projects, again, they're at conceptual level right now. You've seen this last month. I split it across the, you know, basically Klein's Island, conveyance, and SRPs. The Klein's Island, we've already addressed master plan. We addressed how we're going to raise the peak flow capabilities. And there may be a pump station needed, an additional pump station needed at Klein's Island. That's something I'll talk about shortly. The 2 items I have in bold are what we just talked about 5 minutes ago. The little Lehigh interceptor from the water plant area down to Klein's Island needs to be addressed. Same thing with the Western Lehigh, all the way from the pre-treatment plant down to the water plant area needs to be addressed. And then, of course, there's, like I mentioned, there's some interceptor from the signatories that may be problematic in the future. That's something we're talking about with DEP. And then the SRPs, we've talked about a handful of times already. The SRPs are the one thing we can control. And but it's hard to get everyone into the, you know, into an alignment with committing to money, because that's the best way to say it, isn't it? It's the commitment to the money is the challenge we have with the SRPs. So just quickly, master plan. There's a whole slew of projects that Chuck rolls out every year with the capital plan. This is a cover page from the master plan. The next one's actually going to be due December of 2024. So we'll start working on that later this year and all of 2024 to get an update. And then again, the peak wet weather, talked about this a handful of times. Just for repetitive sake, the current peak flow capabilities of Klein Zion is about 87 before the alpha 03 needs to be activated. We're trying to eliminate that activation under 3 different phases of work, 87 to 100, 100 to 120, and above 120. So this is where specifically about the whole, what are we putting in the 2035 bucket? Are we going to do all 3? Are we going to do phase 1 and phase 2? There's a lot of, it goes back to the SRPs. The more SRP work is done, phase 3 may not be needed. And what happens if the growth doesn't occur? So there's a lot of phase 3 is question mark at this point. SRPs we talked about, so I'll mention some details here. We've done multiple versions of SRPs, if you will. We have Arcadis came up with a benchmark, if they were in charge of the system, they would do X. And then the signatories gave us Y. But then, of course, there's a bunch of iterations in between. And those iterations in between, you can see the top line there. Depending on what SRP solution is, ultimately implemented, you can see the wide range of peak flows that a model predicted. And that's where, it gets tricky about above 120. When was that going to occur? And, and how far above 120 will it occur? And again, it goes all the way back to growth, and it goes all the way back to how much I&I is going to be removed from the system. So our best assumption right now with the signatory SRPs is a peak flow of about 140. So again, we can do 87 now. When I get to 120, and then here we go again. Are we going to commit to doing something above 120 in this plan or not? That's going to be determined this year. The impact of the SRPs on the 2 main conveyance projects. We are going to size those 2 interceptors as if the signatory supplied SRPs will be what actually gets performed. So we're not going to assume, a best case or worst case. We're going to assume whatever they have given us to date is what is going to be implemented. So we're going to size, conservatively size those 2 interceptors based on that philosophy. And again, why is it so important? The more I&I we get out, the more capacity is freed up for allocation purposes. Of course, that's for economic development. Lisa, do you want to jump in here about the SRPs and the challenges we face with the commitment specifically, and then how are we going to sustain the efforts for the next decade?
Yeah, I think simply put, the municipalities are struggling, not all of them, but many of them are struggling with the ability to commit future boards with significant capital costs. So where the projects that we do at Klein's Island get passed through to their bills, that's kind of out of their control. But the work that they do on their own system, they have boards and councils that have to approve those year to year. So putting a 10-year or 15-year plan together and committing to many millions of dollars of capital work on their own systems is difficult for current boards or current managers to do. And that seems to be the biggest challenge that we're facing. The municipal managers that we talk to are very willing and interested in doing the work and maintaining their systems, but they have that difficulty of saying, yes, 10 years from now, I can say that my borough or my township is going to be willing to spend $1 million a year on system rehab or whatever the case may be. So what they're putting in the plan and what they're submitting to fill tends to be maybe a little more conservative and smaller because of that concern about committing future boards. I think the biggest driver. Also not knowing what the rest of like how all this is going to come together, I think is once we get through this phase, they're going to see a little more, but we kind of need to know now what they're going to do in order to evaluate the options.
If
challenge.
they don't take care of the I&I in the long term, we have a mechanism to charge them more because of the higher flow they have. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So, big concern or what's going to come out of this, toward the end of this year, probably we're going to start getting into what is the cost recovery mechanism for these projects. The intermunicipal agreements that we have today are for the most part silent on peak flows and infiltration and inflow impacts. So the municipalities pay based on their total flow, but that doesn't necessarily capture their peak flows that drive some of these projects. So it's going to be a bridge we're going to need to cross as we develop a financial model around this and develop the concepts for updated intermunicipal agreements.
If you put some incentive for them that, more flow, you pay more, I think that would help them to recognize this is something that's going to be an annual recurring budget that they need to have. Maybe it's not that simple, but
yeah, overall, the way that our intermunicipal agreements work for the billing, it tends to sort of shield or hide the impact because you're taking costs over the course of a year and you're taking your flows and your loads over the course of a year and kind of doing a lot of math around it. It's not transparent to the municipality how their higher flows based on leakage actually impacts their costs. So that would be I think a goal for the renegotiation of those agreements.
thank you.
Just to follow up to this topic, some of the billing meters can't capture all the peak flows for various reasons. And another important note is that this is something that DEP is laser focused on. This is something that they have power to control the municipalities with is the SRP piece. They don't have much to say about Conn's Island. They're okay with the concept. The intercept is the interceptor. This is what they can really focus with on the municipalities with. So
just a follow-up question. So I don't know what DEP's current thinking is, but back in the day, did like an actual one study, or you did the 537 plan and you evaluated, was it more effective to remove the I&I, or was it more effective to bring it to the plan and treat it? So have we arrived at that conclusion yet? Because that can certainly impact what the signatories have to do. If they're doing a minimal amount and they're gonna pay for it anyway through the capital improvements and capacity expansion at the plant or the interceptors or pumping stations. So one way or the other, it's gonna get paid for, and it's just which is the most economic way to do it.
yeah, I'll at least jump in, but DEP's been consistent since they came down and talked to us in 2019. I&I reduction is a major piece of this plan. That's their guidance. Make it major.
And I'll say, so part of what we're trying to do with this, the preliminary screening of alternatives and now in this phase is really look at those costs. So you see these first two lines here where if we do the I&I work that the signatories say they're going to do, the peak flow at Klein's Island will be, we think, 140 million gallons a day. But depending on the results of that work, it could be as high as 175 million gallons a day. So what does it cost to treat that additional 35 million gallons per day of peak flow at the plant versus taking it out of the system?
To remove it.
Yeah, and that's where, it's kind of a soft word that we used in the objectives, but recognizing that long-term rehab needs of the system, what we're trying to impress upon the signatories is that they're gonna have to do sewer system rehab work anyway, because the systems are aging, and can we get some of it done sooner rather than later to have an impact on these larger regional costs? And we're hoping that the FAA will solidify that analysis for us.
Thank you. So just to hone in on the Little Lehigh Interceptor, we saw this last month, but I'm going to show it again. This is right from our what we call the KISS app. This is a great tool that our GIS team, with the help of all the other signatories, you know, they gave us their data. So this is a invaluable tool for the planning exercise. So the area I have circled in that orange line is the area in question for the Little Lehigh Interceptor. The red circle on the left is one of the major bottlenecks where 3 separate lines come in and then leave us one. You can see on the next slide. The second red circle is a water plant, and the third red circle is Klein's Island. So basically, from all those areas in between the red circles, that needs to be addressed. It's too small. The interceptors are too small. It's been too small. You'll see in the next slide why. So remember I said there's 3 coming in and 1 going out. So Lisa, if you could kind of hover over, I tried to make this as simple as possible, and then, you know, so I can explain it. On the left side, you got 27 to 30 and 36 coming in, leaves us a 30. And you got to cross under some siphons, raw water. There's a raw water intake from the creek. So our sewer pipe has to dip under that pipe. So there's another bottleneck there. It does go up to 36. Then it goes up to 42. But then you see this right here. We have our force main, a 30-inch force main coming in, and then I apologize, that should say where it says 12-inch from Salisbury, that should say 18. So the 18-inch from Salisbury to 27 from the city, all come crashing in there. There's no access to that. So you can't see it. And then it leaves us a 60 going to the plant. So basically from the plant back to Shriver's Bridge, this needs fixed. And just to put it in perspective, this has been a bottleneck. It's been a bottleneck since the 80s. Park pump station was put in the 80s. So that's one of the LCA relief projects. Then we had to put another relief line upstream of the Park pump station. That's number 2. South Whitehall, that 30-inch South Whitehall on the left side of the screen, that was the 3rd relief project. And then the 4th relief project was the Salisbury line. There's actually a 5th one from Copley that's not on the screen, a little upstream. So the point is that the relief infrastructure is full. So the only solution is
The
to,
Park Pump Station discharges at 2 locations.
yes, it's,
On the bridge.
Yep.
And then also at the down here.
yeah, so the purple line is the force main. So not everything that enters the Park pump station area is pumped. Some of it still flows.
Oh, I see, it's gravity into
Yep.
there. Okay.
Yep.
I was gonna say, to get from A to B there, you need a pump, okay.
Yeah, so so there's flow that passes beyond Park pump station, and whatever doesn't pass gets pumped.
I got you. Thank you.
So, you know, this looks simple, but this is not going to be a simple fix. So that's project number 1. Project number 2 is our Western Lehigh Interceptor. It just looks messy, but I'll walk you through it. The circle, the red circle in the top right-hand corner is the Park pump station force main again. So that was the first relief line put in the 80s. And then actually, at least in the middle of the screen right there is the Spring Creek pump station. That was put in the 90s as a relief. And then the next red circle, Spring Creek force main had to be extended to provide relief. So that's number 3. And then number 4 is what Chuck is doing right now, the Truxtun area. So that big red circle that's a little bit thicker, that is the problem area of the Western Lehigh that DEP mandates that we fix long-term. So that 4th circle up there by the pre-treatment plant, that's just a short-term fix until we do the long-term. And again, DEP says you shall plan, a long-term solution for the Western Lehigh.
Just out of curiosity, what's the DEP's hammer?
I'll have Lisa say that.
The biggest hammer that DEP has is to deny new connections,
Okay,
and that's pretty
Got it.
powerful.
thank you.
Can they do that in individual townships, municipalities, or the entire system?
Both, either or both.
And that area is a priority because there's been many overflows, correct? So that's
Yeah.
a documented area that doesn't just have a little bit of.
I will flip
Storm.
all the way back to the Blossom diagram, but some of the biggest purple dots are right inside this circle and then up in the other end, New York Queens Island.
Right.
So, yeah, so Jeff, just specifically for that red area, it's flat, some of it's actually reverse slope. So it was installed, I guess, improperly, and it was too small. So, hindsight's 20/20, but the interceptor should have been bigger back in the 70s. So that's project number 2 for conveyance. I'm not sure if you've seen this. I can't recall if you've seen this specific map or not, but there are not many solutions. And this is very hard to see. You have to zoom in when you can later. Anything that's in black is okay and existing. It's the items that are colored, under this solution is new. So this particular solution is a force main from the PTP, which is identified where Lisa's moving her cursor in green. That's a route that has been, preliminarily selected for the force main. So we would get the flow from PTP all the way to the water plant. And then, from the water plant down to Klein's Island would be the balance of the work. So again, this particular solution is the PTP force main solution.
What is that going through?
The force main?
That green line? The
Um,
green one, yeah,
Yeah, so for the starting at the PTP, it runs across where Chuck's gonna put in the force main for his relief project. And then it cuts under 2222. It follows Mill Creek Road, follows Lower Macungie, follows East Texas Road. It gets in behind the hospital. And then sneaks through Snell.
Your house, Linda.
probably not away.
It sneaks through the Salisbury, and then it gets on to, outside of Martin Luther King area.
I guess the question is, can you do that all through roads, or you're gonna have to go through private property?
This is all, I think majority of this is through roads, so. And so it's about 11, 12 miles. I'm sorry, I should back that off. It lives 11, 12 miles if we go all the way to Klein's Island. But since we're gonna, in theory, just get to the water plant area, it's about 9 miles. So then the other solution for Western Lehigh is, again, is to parallel it. And there are varying opinions on the constructability of that, due to the nature of the existing interceptor following the stream and getting through some pretty, what would you say, Lisa, environmentally sensitive areas. So there are not many options for Western Lehigh. To you parallel it, or you put a force main in. I guess there's different ways to do the gravity solution, right? That's just more getting into the details, but conceptually, either you follow the creek or you put a force main in. And then, of course, the area from the water plant to Klein's Island, we would, the thought from some key players is to do, gravity. There's actually on the other side of the creek, there's an abandoned railroad bed that seems to be the location for this new pipe. So that's going to be flushed out, by Halloween.
Which side of the creek is that new line on? Same side?
From the water plant down? Or
From the water plant west?
For the water plant west, it depends on what depends on what the selection, what's selected. If we do gravity, we would be within proximity to where the existing is. If we do force main, then we're going across a totally separate area.
So you'd be on the other side of the creek then,
Yes, if you do the force main,
if you did the first.
you'd be on the, I guess, west side, you'd say. Yeah. The left side.
Yeah, the railroad,
South side.
the railroad's on the south side, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm explaining this correctly. From the water plant to Klein's Island, the current pipe is on the north side,
Right.
in the road. The proposed location would be the south side, which is where the abandoned railroad bed is. So that's from the water plant to Klein's Island. Upstream from the water plant, it's either the force main, or again, it's just following the existing, following the creek.
So it would be on the north side of the creek then.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, this existing western Lehigh interceptor crosses the creek several times.
I can't count the number of times it crosses it.
Sometimes it
okay.
runs right in the middle, depending on whether,
Really?
yes, and where the stream bank is today. A lot of movement of the stream bank.
And when was that put in?
Pardon? In the '70s.
Early 70s.
So it did a good job for 50 years. But it's time.
Too small.
Too small. So the additional project concepts, again, I've kind of hinted at this. Above 120, we have solutions identified, but we're still, it's all about the timing for that one. And again, there may be an additional pumping needed depending on how we get the flow there. Conveyance, pump station may go away, to be honest. Spring Creek may need upsized. And then Rabbit, that's a Upper McCungy pump station that needs to be looked at. Then on the right hand side, remember I mentioned those collector trunk lines that tie in. Some of those, not all of them listed have problems. It's just, basically, right near the connection. Some of those connections are problematic, model predicted in the future. Some of them are problematic now. But again, that bucket on the right, the more the municipalities do for I&I, all those can go away. All right, the next steps. So this is the technical slide, again, I'm sound like a broken record, but we somehow have to come up as a region, what are we going to put in this 10-year bucket? The next two are, again, location and method of construction for both the interceptors. Number 4 is what solution are we selecting for peak wet weather at Klein's Island? And then we need to talk to DEP about those. I haven't really mentioned them much, but flow triggered is a concept where you only build it when the flow triggers the need. So we need to get DEP's buy-in / guidance on that philosophy. Non-technical, we talked about this last March board meeting. AJ mentioned some of this. All these are very important, especially number 1. That goes without saying. So this is going to be. We're not going to have all the answers by Halloween for sure, but we're going to get closer towards the answers. Upcoming, so now through March 2025. Again, the PSOA is just about done. FAA, we go through Halloween of this year. That selection of solution is when we have to come up as a region. Which solution are we comfortable with moving forward with? Then we have to write the plan. And so that's September 24. I haven't really talked about that recently, but if we go by the book, and if we want to hit the March 2025 deadline that DEP is expecting, pencils down with the 537 plan September 24. So all the planning commissions get it, and then that starts the municipal process of 537 approval. So it's just a 3-month look ahead. We're talking about the FAA right now. We're going to try to have more meetings with the signatories, individual meetings about the SRPs next month. I'll be back next board meeting for another authorization request for AECom. They've been doing a lot in the background, which we'll get into next board meeting. There's a big meeting with DEP up in Wilkes-Barre, May 16th. And of course, we have our normal KISS meetings. And then Lisa, you added the stakeholder outreach piece, which is going to kick into high gear, I imagine soon. So that is the FAA. So at the end of the day, I do need I'm asking for a request of $258,000 for the FAA phase, and of that 258, 280 is towards Arcadis.
I have a question. So we talked about a lot here. So just going back, so exactly what Arcadis is gonna do, and kind of got lost here in the shuffle. So they're gonna be doing modeling, computer modeling of 6 potential conveyance and collection system solutions, evaluations, and then they're going to do cost estimates for those and maybe some initial actual site work on constructability, that kind of stuff. So that's what their proposals for.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, the big thing is the model runs, and then they create these nice dashboards that summarizes everything, rolls up to this nice dashboard.
Okay.
And that's what was done during the PSOA phase. Yep. Yeah, and just to focus in on your cost estimate piece, Arcadis is going to handle the conveyance. And then they're going to take, which we already have, we're going to refine it. They're going to take estimates from Kleinfelder, the estimates from Jacobs, estimates from AECom for the other pieces. But Arcadis is the one who prepares the overall dashboard.
Motion, anybody else has questions?
Any other questions from the board? Any questions? The motion for capital plan authorization for the final alternatives analysis, the FAA, for a total amount of $258,000. That includes professional services authorization for Arcadis for conducting the FAA. $208,000. Motion made by Jeff. Seconded by Amir. Are there any questions? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much, Bill. See you next month. Right. We have another item under wastewater. It is Pines Island wastewater treatment plant. Primary digester number 2 cleaning and rehabilitation project. Seeking approval is the green documents in the board package, digital board package pages 25 to 28.
This one is about the same amount of money, but much simpler.
Much shorter.
Yes, Chuck, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. So if you recall, a couple months ago, the board approved the cleaning of primary digester number 2. Digesters are rehabbed and cleaned on a 5-year cycle at Pines Island. This authorization is for the mechanical rehab of primary digester number 2. The cleaning contractor is mobilizing this week, and he's going to be cleaning the digester. So we want to immediately follow that cleaning process with the mechanical upgrade. The mechanical upgrade consists of demolition of the aging gas mixing system and replacement of that with a new compressor, new suction and discharge piping, new sludge sample lines, new external stairs and handrail, and then associated explosion-proof electrical components to round out the mechanical upgrade of primary digester number 2. So this project It was advertised for bid last month. We had a pre-bid meeting on March 23rd, and we opened the bids on April 5th. And we got a pretty good turnout on the GC bids. We got 6 bidders. The low bidder is Zimmerman Environmental. They've done some work at Klein's Island and in Suburban, and we've had a satisfactory experience with this contractor. Their price was good, in line with the engineer's estimate. And then we received a separate electrical contract bids. We got 2 bidders. Diefendorfer was low. Diefendorfer has done a lot of work at Klein's Island and in our Suburban division. And they always do decent work. So the combined total of those 2 low bids is $196,450. And the engineer's estimate was $213,000. So we're just under the engineer's estimate. So we think they're very competitive bids. So what I'm asking for today is capital project authorization for contract number 1 to Zimmerman and contract number 2 to Diefendorfer, and then a professional services authorization for construction phase to the design engineer, GHD. And GHD has a lot of digester experience. They typically do these projects for us every 5 years on each tank. Any questions?
How often do you have to do a lot of the mechanical stuff?
It depends. It's a really nasty environment. It's very corrosive. It's very, it tends to degrade equipment quickly. Typically like every 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, the stuff, it doesn't last for 20-year lifespan, the internal components. Typically, so the next time we clean this tank, we probably won't have to do as extensive mechanical work.
That's what I was calling.
But then maybe the next cycle after, we'll be back at it.
Okay.
Okay, we have before us a capital project authorization construction phase for the Allentown Division wastewater treatment plant. Primary digester number 2, mechanical rehabilitation. That includes a total price of $248,650. That includes general contract award for Zimmerman Environmental and an electrical contract award to Diefendorfer for electrical contractors for $64,950. Go back to Zimmerman. That's $131,500. And also includes a professional service authorization to GHD Incorporated for $27,200. I need a motion and a second. Motion by Ted and seconded by Amir. Are there any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, moving on with our agenda. We move to number 7, monthly financial review. This is the second board meeting of the month. And the March 2023 report was sent separately. Is also available on our website, I assume. Right. And then Ed Stroh.
Okay, yep.
We'll share the screen for Ed's financial presentation.
So we're going to talk about how we did in March 2023. I kind of split up the slides a little bit because quite frankly, when I was looking at the table that had everything on there once, I was having trouble reading the numbers myself. So after 20 years looking at financial reports, time to make a change. So we'll start with what we did for the month. Actually, when I was closing the books and looking at these numbers for the first time, I was pretty happy to see what we did in terms of income statement and cash flows. In total, LCA's positive, and that's because basically all 3 funds, water, wastewater, and city, are on the positive side in various numbers. And also on the cash flow statement, we had some nice positive numbers from, again, all 3 funds. And so we were up
positive by almost $12 million in cash flow just for the month. Again, what that kind of makes me happy when I see the positive numbers. You don't always get the chance to do that depending on timing of it, especially debt service, but that's the way it played out this month. So it's pretty good. In terms of where we are to forecast, we're up in total, and that was again due to all three funds being on the favorable side against forecast on income, and we repeated that again on cash flows with all three funds up to forecast as well for the month. So we got some favorableness. We were coming in a little bit favorable from March, and we certainly didn't do anything to erode that in March. So take a look at year to date. I think we've got to go back one. We just did that one, sorry.
All right, where do you want to be?
So
Where do you
yeah,
want to be?
we did the year to date, and so that was good. Now let's go back to the month, because of what I was talking about. For the month, I was really happy to see that all three funds were better than forecast. The only one that had some issue in terms of cash flows was City Division, and you can see that's not off by much on like $4 million worth of forecast. So the month was pretty good, and we'll go back to year to date. That's pretty good so far. And then we'll go to forecast. And as we had done in January and February, went up, if you don't mind. As we did for the income, we kept static with respect to budget. You go through the first quarter, you're not sure if some things are really permanent until the quarter plays out. So it kind of held to the budget for the year. And obviously, given some of the favorability that we have through the first quarter, we'll be looking at what I think would be, without any suspicion, some favorableness in suburban water, wastewater, and the city division across net income statements. On the cash flow statement, during the month, suburban water, if you remember back a year ago, we borrowed $12.1 million for suburban water projects. We did not take a drawdown in 2022 on any of them projects. We were a little bit behind in terms of some of the project execution. So I delayed that so that I didn't have to pay debt service and we can capture some interest income. I took a large portion of money in March. In fact, we took $6,950,000, and the budget had $3,950,000. So immediately I created almost a $3 million excess in cash flow as a result of that. That will be the only draws that we take, because the draws were to replenish what we spent last year and also to cover what we expected and budgeted to spend this year. So it's easy for me to say that on almost a $3 million favorable variance on suburban water, I expect for the year as a result of that. Suburban wastewater, all we've got really going on in wastewater for the full year on cash flows is a little bit of working capital change. And on the city division, we're down about $600,000. And really what's changing that is the amount of money that we're getting from Invest. We had budgeted, I'm missing something here. Let me get to my notes. I'm missing something. No, that's basically coming from differences in operating income. We did close the Penvest loan, and for the year, we're whole. We said we were going to take in $1.4 million. We budgeted $1.4 million. What changed was the timing. Through March, we did not receive any of that money yet. So we'll be getting that, I'm hoping, in the next week or two. So that it's just a swap in timing. Okay. All right, suburban water, year-to-date net income up compared to forecast. You can see some of the variances there. The big ones obviously are operating revenue and pretty much across commercial, industrial, and residential. We have higher revenue volumes. Operating expenses were a little bit higher. We offset that with some interest income. So we got a favorable factor on all three funds across the interest income. Whatever balances excess cash or investments, we've captured more income, obviously due to economic conditions associated with inflation rates, et cetera. So that helps offset some of that, and interest expense at this time was lower. So we ended up with a favorable variance for the year to date so far. And like I said, on Suburban, there's nothing on the income side right now until we do the Q2 forecast that would suggest changing. And we will when we're doing that, but I'd be really shocked if we were not showing something a little bit favorable to budget as we move on in forecast realm. Cash flows, again, we talked about what that $3 million did, and you can see it there, and the debt service and financing being the biggest variance. Although we got some help from higher operating revenues, pretty much the same categories, residential, commercial, and industrial revenue volumes are up. So, you know, it's good year to date that we're up, but driving most of that is the borrowing, which I expected. So full year, we should be up by about $3 million, largely attributable to that, I'll call it additional borrowing. In terms of some of the metrics for Suburban Water, not bad. We're down a few percentage points on debt service coverage ratio, but not in any way, shape, or form close to the 1.20 target. Year-to-date operating ratio is good with respect to targets as well. And we expect the year to be pretty good. And base cash on hand, well, as a result of $3 million of borrowing, for a period of time, we were lower than 180, and now we're up to 357 almost. So that was a replenishment game. Suburban wastewater, on the income side, year to date, we're up. You can see almost 804. The biggest variance in this is a combination of industrial revenue, commercial revenues. This one also had some higher tapping fees that we captured so far year to date. Again, the same concept, full year up against income, we did not change. Given the favorableness that we're at now year to date, we'll be looking at probably something favorable with respect to budget. And in the cash flows, with $2.9 million, that is mostly due to the fact that we roll over. So again, another timing thing. So I'm being cautious. We rolled over about $2.1 million of investments into cash near the end of March, but didn't get a chance to reinvest it until we're going forward in April. So that will swing the other way in April. And again, for the full year at this moment, given that it's a trading thing back and forth, all we've got really is working capital. We'll see where that goes as we look at some of the projects that are coming up in that arena. Debt service coverage. You know, I hate to say this, but you know, when I look at 8, it's not as good as looking at 11.69, but you know, we're comparing ourselves to the target of 1.2 also. All is still good. And at the end of the year, we'll catch up. And year-to-date operating ratio, we're down a little bit, but the forecast will be to catch up, and base cash on hand is good. So with two funds, we're sitting with plenty of cash in terms of above it 180, and debt service coverage ratios are good. And then we'll get to the city. Again, positive variance year to date against forecast on net income. There's a lot of variances here. You got increase in operating revenues. You got an increase in interest income, and we had lower interest expense, and the only negative would be we're a little bit lower on operating expenses. That was mostly due to higher depreciation and amortization, and that's not a discretionary item. So I gotta say that, you know, when you strip that out, discretionary spending would have been favorable as well, so. And then cash flows were up by 583,000. We're getting a large chunk of money on debt reserve balances, imbalances, other balances at M&T that are capturing very high interest rate now. And as you look at the variances, you've got favorable operating variance, kind of neutral on debt service and financing. CapEx was a little bit lower, and again, that interest and investment income that is really helping. Metric wise, all good. Coverage ratio good, better than targets. Year-to-date operating ratio is also better, and days cash on hand is almost 300. So looking at the scorecard, we hit double digits again, and I truly believe that anytime that we have that many green blocks, there isn't much negative to say about any of the funds going on. So when we do the forecast, we're still going to be looking for some good things. Just to kind of summarize it, we closed Q1 favorable to or at forecast across all three funds. You've seen the income and cash flow variances. The scorecard certainly is a good showcase of where we are, and we'll take a look at Q2 forecast. We're gonna take a look at all the revenues and expenses. Chuck's group's gonna start giving us some capital numbers when I get their form out to them, and then we'll take another stab at it. But you know, so far so good. Questions?
Oh, thank you, Ed, for the presentation and good numbers. Any other questions? All right, let's thank you. Moving on to monthly system operations overview. The board packet, pages 29 to 30 is attached to our board packet.
Andrew.
Awesome. Good afternoon. In front of you, you do have the March monthly ops report. As far as water production and wastewater goes, pretty consistent throughout the year so far. Nothing major to note. There was 2.7 inches of rain in March, which brings us up to 7.9 total in 2023. That's pretty light for the year, looking back in the past. So we'll hopefully get some more rain as we move on. There was one bypass, and of course that was in Heidelberg. That was from 3.4 to 3.7, and it discharged about a little over 60,000 gallons. That was due to a 1.62 inches of rainfall. There was no injury accidents. And going back to what Chuck had mentioned earlier, digester number 2 was taken offline in early March. We started draining it, and hope the contractors are here this week or next week, and this week, yeah. And we can kick that project off. Chris, do you have anything you want to bring up?
I mean, nothing really to note, just some of you guys may have seen all the work being done on Gordon Street. We're about wrapping that up, and we're going to do our final connections end of this week, and it will be live. Super proud moment for the field guys. It's the first time they did their own main lay section in about 10 years. So well done, well processed, and it's a good experience for everybody involved.
I noticed they were there the other night.
I heard.
Huh?
I heard.
Uh,
Were they behaving?
well, the beer cans were easily stacked.
That's all we could ask.
The
joke.
All right, it's a joke. Was there a leak after they put it in the ground? Is there a?
We found an unmarked, with one of our excavators, an unmarked old line that was just dead ended. So we actually pulled one out and was able to rip it out pretty quick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
As far as other highlights go, I just wanted to make note that EPA has has proposed federal drinking water standards for PFAS compounds. There's a total of 6 of them that they are proposing MCLs for. LCA is currently looking at those regulations, seeing how we can handle it and doing some additional testing. Just make an additional note, PADEP proposed and published MCLs back in January. So there are current MCLs, but these are a lot lower than PADEP. Flipping over to the other side, this is just highlights from all of our facilities. In Heidelberg, as I mentioned, we did have 1 bypass and there was 2 permit exceedances relating to the wet weather. And in Sand Spring, we did have 3 permit exceedances as well, and those all relate to ammonia exceedances. We're happy to answer any questions.
Has there been any assessment of potential impact on the number of well or water sources we have for the FAS?
It's ongoing, yes.
So we're looking into that.
Yes, we have been for quite some time now.
All right, thanks. Any other board questions? Thank you, Anthony. All right, staff comments,
Nothing further.
solicitor comments,
No comments.
public comments on any topics at all?
No, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you for your response. Board member comments on any topics? All right, this time we're going to adjourn this meeting. There is going to be an executive session after this at 25 of, let's see, we actually have 10 minutes, 25 minutes. And that'll be covering legal matters, no decisions will be made at that time. So, thank you very much for your attendance and the presentations and good work. Thank you.
Thank you.